Alright, so today we're going to be solving by square roots. Just like we did yesterday, we solved by factoring or we solved by using our graphing calculator. You're finding the two solutions in a quadratic equation. They should always have two solutions. So pause the video if you need to write down these steps, but we're going to go on with these. These are pretty quick problems because you guys already know how to solve for x. You're just solving for x squared. So the first step says isolate the x squared, which means that it should be the only thing on the left side of the equation and everything else should be on the right. So step one is done in this problem. To undo a square, the opposite or the inverse operation of a square is to take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root. If you need to figure out what's the square root of 25, or if you don't know it, go to your calculator and type in what's the square root of 25. Well, that's 5. So the answer is x equals 5. Square root of x squared is just x, square root of 25 is 5. However, we need to have plus 5 or negative 5. You should always have a positive and a negative solution for these problems. So anytime you have a quadratic, you need to have two solutions. And just as a reminder, if I did 5 times 5 and negative 5 times negative 5, those both will give me 25. So both the positive and the negative answer would be correct. All right, we're going to solve for x here, just like I would normally solve for anything, except it just says x squared instead of x. So to undo a subtract 144, I add 144 to both sides. This gives me x squared equals 144. So now I'm at the point where I want to undo the square by taking the square root. If you don't know the square root of 144, do the square root of 144 in your calculator, and you get 12. The only difference is I should say positive 12 and negative 12, because I need to have two solutions anytime I solve a quadratic equation. Okay, so we're going to keep going. How do I get x squared all by itself? Well, there's this 3 right here. So I want to undo my multiplication. Well, the inverse operation of multiplication is division, so I'm going to divide by 3. X squared equals 27. All right, so if I take the square root of 27 this time, this gives me a decimal, and I don't want an answer like that. So what I can do is think back to how do you simplify radicals. I think we did this maybe in Unit 2, in the beginning of the trig unit. So 27, I need to come up with what's a perfect square that goes into 27. So things that divide into 27 would be 3, 9 times 3. Well, 9's a perfect square, so if I take the square root of 9, that's 3. So this is 3 radical 3. The square root of x squared is just x. And like anything else, I need plus and minus. So it's plus or minus 3 radical 3. Now you can just double check what is 3 radical 3 and what's the square root of 27. Just make sure you get the same thing. So that's a way to make sure that you have the correct answer. Okay, sometimes you'll get solutions like this. Sometimes you'll get whole number solutions. You should never have any decimals. That means that you didn't simplify your radical. All right, so we want to get x squared by itself. Well, I need to undo the 5 and the minus 100. So I'm going to undo adding and subtracting first. This gives me 5x squared equals 100. And then I need to divide by 5 next. X squared equals 20. Okay, so now I know I need to take the square root of both sides. And I'm going to get x equals plus or minus something. Well, what's the square root of 20? Okay, so that gives me a decimal. It's not going to give me a whole number. That means I need to figure out what are some things that multiply into 20. Well, I could do 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. But I need one that's a perfect square, so I don't want to pick 1, 10, 2, or 20. I need to pick the one that's 4 and 5. So I know this is root 4 times root 5. And what is the square root of 4? That's 2. Okay, so x equals plus or minus 2 root 5. If you don't remember what are your perfect squares, maybe we'll write them out. I mean, you can go on forever, but we'll say maybe we could just write them out up to 100. If you never remember what your perfect squares are, just do what's 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, and so on, okay, until you get your list. Okay, flip over to the back. We've just got 4 more problems to try. All right, so we've got x squared we need to get alone, so you always want to solve for your x squared here. Alright, in problem 5, you want to undo adding and subtracting before you undo multiplying or dividing. So we have negative 4x squared equals negative 144. Then we need to divide both sides by negative 4, and we get x squared equals 36. Okay, I want to take the square root of 36, and that was one of our numbers on our perfect squares list, right? So that should turn out to be a whole number. Square root of 36 is 6, so it's plus or minus 6. All right, just make sure that you always have plus or minus on all your answers. So plus or minus, we have that on all of ours. Here we should have plus or minus 2 also. All right, so we're going to divide by 4. Now, if we divide by 4 on this one, if you do 25 divided by 4, I get a decimal. Remember, we said no decimals. So we haven't even gotten to the square root part, so I'm just going to hit math and fraction. And I'm going to leave it as 25 over 4. Okay, so now I could take the square root of both sides. Square root, you can do it in your calculator if you want. Square root of 25 over 4 is 5 over 2. And we know it's going to be plus or minus 5 over 2. Another way to think of this is, well, we did the square root of the top. What's the square root of 25? That's 5. We did the square root of the bottom. That's 2. So that's where 5 over 2 came from. All right, number 7. How do I undo a negative 2? I divide. So I have x squared equals 50. So if I try the square root of 50, that's not a whole number. Okay, so I'm going to use my perfect squares list from up here. I guess on the other side. And let's come up with a perfect square that goes into 50. If you don't know something that goes into 50 and you don't want to write out all the factors of 50, well, try dividing. Can you do 50 divided by 49? Can you divide it by 36? Can you divide it by 25? Well, yep, that one worked. So it's square root of 25 times 2. That's the same thing as 50. The square root of 25 is 5. And so it's 5 radical 2. And this is a plus or minus. Remember, you should always have 2 solutions. All right, last problem. I have an 8. How do I undo that? I divide. So x squared equals 4. And if I square root 4, that should be a perfect square, so that gives me 2. And the final answer is plus or minus 2.